A couple of weeks ago, LG invited me to Korea, where I spent a few days with the LG G7 ThinQ. Yes, that's the actual name of the phone, and it is simply put a more polished version of previous LG flagships like the G6 and the V30. We were just a few days short of having enough time for a full review, so instead, here are my extended first impressions. So the G7 is basically everything we expected this flagship to be, which for the most part is a good thing. Slightly curved Gorilla Glass 5 covers both sides of the G7, fit and finish is excellent, the device feels even more dense and premium than previous LG models, and it still comes with the same durability rating and IP68 waterproofing as previous models, so it should be more durable than most competitors. Emphasis being on should. I didn't have much trouble cracking both glass panels of my similarly certified G6. Anyway, there are a few surprises on the body of the G7, starting with two new buttons. A power button on the right, which LG phones up until now had integrated into their rear fingerprint readers, and below the volume keys on the left, there is now a button that launches the Google Assistant. This is complemented by far-field microphones, which should hear you comfortably up to about 5 meters away from the device. And while you can't remap the button to do anything other than launch the assistant for now, you can at least turn it off if you don't like it. LG not only kept the headphone jack around, but also gave it a dedicated DAC like the one found in the V30 and added support for DTS:X 3D for improved surround sound. I'm not an audiophile, but if you are, then I guess you should be pretty excited about this. Another little surprise comes with the speaker, which LG calls a boombox. Since the G7 is completely sealed for waterproofing, LG actually uses the whole inside of the device as one giant resonance chamber, making this speaker a lot louder than most competitors. You can actually feel the back of the device vibrating, and putting the G7 on a hard surface or a box actually amplifies this effect even further. Pretty cool stuff that I'll demo in the full review. Moving on to the front, we get a 6.1-inch IPS screen with, yes, a notch, and while I'm personally not a huge fan of notches, I guess we're just stuck with them for the next few years. Just like on Huawei phones, you can make the area around the notch black, which looks surprisingly good despite this being an IPS panel, or alternatively, you can choose from a couple of transition effects, so I guess it's fine. On the bottom, you do get a pretty slim chin with nicely rounded corners, and I really like that if the top part is turned black, the phone starts looking quite symmetrical, and also quite a lot like the Galaxy S9, by the way. So the display itself is what you'd expect from an LG IPS screen. It's high resolution, has good colors, and gets really bright with the normal brightness topping out at around 600 to 700 nits, and a built-in super bright mode that temporarily boosts brightness up to 1000 nits for excellent outdoor visibility. And even though some Galaxy devices do boast higher nit ratings than the G7, this one surprisingly looks brighter in direct sunlight. On the screen, you'll be greeted with LG's UI, which is more of an iteration on previous skins rather than a fully new experience. It runs on top of Android 8.0, and LG told us that they've opened a new software center that is dedicated to improving LG's pretty lousy track record with software updates, but given that my G6 from last year still runs on Android 7.0, I'll believe it when I see it. The real reason why you might want to consider buying a G7 though is its cameras. LG is still the only company that does wide-angle cameras on phones well. And this year, the wide-angle and the main camera now both use the exact same 16-megapixel sensor that the V30 had as its main sensor. So apart from optical image stabilization, the wide-angle camera finally isn't a second-class citizen anymore, which I think is the most exciting thing about this phone. The angle isn't quite as wide as it was on the G6, but because of that, there's now close to no fisheye distortion here at all, and everything just looks quite proportional. LG told us that our phones came with very early software, so I'll reserve the pixel peeping for the full review, which you should definitely subscribe for, but first impressions are that the image quality of both of these cameras is better than average, but not outstanding. LG has also introduced a low light mode, which if turned on auto detects dark situations and then uses pixel binning to combine 4 pixels into one, outputting a brighter 4-megapixel shot with less noise. Sounds good on paper, didn't seem too impressive in real life, but again, I'll reserve judgment for that for later. And lastly, the camera now also comes with an improved AI camera mode that auto detects what you are shooting and adjusts settings for you. Oh, and by the way, the selfie camera now has a new 8-megapixel sensor too, which is pretty good. Much better than the terrible selfie cameras found on the G6 and the V30. To round things up, all the standard 2018 flagship specs are on board, which is great, but the only one that might make this phone a deal breaker for some people is the 3000 mAh battery, which is definitely on the smaller side for a phone this big. Once again, I'll have more to say about performance and battery life in the full review, of course. As a fan of wide-angle cameras, I'm quite excited about the LG G7 ThinQ. Despite that silly name, it seems to be significantly more polished than all the other LG phones that came before it. And hey, other than the full review, I'll also have another really exciting video coming up about LG. Since I was in Korea, I got to interview a bunch of LG engineers and business people, so I'll have an in-depth video analyzing how LG is trying to turn its slowing smartphone business around now that they have a new president. So if you're interested in either of those, be sure to follow me on my social media channels, especially Twitter, and subscribe to me here on YouTube.